afternoon, Bahamas, and welcome to the Hit Back. I'm your host, Nahaja Black. It is a beautiful day here in the 242. I'm excited about the show we're about to have today. I'm really excited because we're going to have a great guest joining us all the way from South Africa, talking about a topic that I find fascinating. One that before I knew it had a word or a phrase, or that was even like a true idea, a true theory behind it, a true concept, where we were talking about this on the show, changing the narrative. What does it mean to be Bahamian? What does it mean? You know, we do this all the time on the show, where we do a lot of mental health, personal introspection. We do this a lot on the show as well, but we try to figure out, who are we? How can we build a better nation if we as a people, as an individual, if we as a human being, singular, within our families, if we don't understand who we are, if we are still living in the limitations of yesterday, or in the constraints of what people said about us, or the limiting phrases and the narratives that we live, that this is what we have to do. You got to do X, Y, and Z to be successful. You've got to be this type of country to find yourself in this space. Before I knew, I was introduced to this wonderful author, academic. Before I knew any of that, we would talk about it. But ladies and gentlemen, today, I feel all kind of justification, vindication. I feel smart today because I was introduced just recently to this brilliant woman, Shanae Swart, author, academic. I think she's a professor as well, and I may have missed, but she is a professor, I'm sure. You can't have someone that brilliant and not teaching, but she goes around the world actually sharing this idea of reauthoring your life. And she used the phrase of taking back the pen of your life, right? Retelling your life story, reshaping it. And I've read some of her articles. I'll tell you guys, you're going to be very intrigued, as I am. This is a riveting conversation, because we're going to talk about reauthoring, this idea of retelling your story, reshaping that story. Where did the story come from initially? Anyway, where's the story of your life? Where did it come from? Who are we? And she did a very fascinating article that is co-constructing organizational and leadership narratives. And there was a part in that where I'm going to read part of that when she gets on. But there was a particular part of that article where I was like, man, listen, at the beginning, this thing is lit. That's why I love Dr. Olivia Saunders. Dr. Saunders introduced me to Madam Swart. So, I'm feeling all kind of good inside, right? I feel all kind of smart inside. So without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, I want to introduce to you this fascinating, brilliant woman all the way from South Africa, Shanae Swart. Madam Swart, welcome to the Hit Back.
Thank you so much. Such a great privilege. I wish I was a professor, but not.
Trust me, in my world, you would probably be quite competent and quite able. I always say that you're only as smart as your teacher, right? So I believe that your teacher can be with title or without. So I definitely consider you my professor today and for a while, because I'm reading the book. Eh? So it's fascinating.
I'll be your professor.
Miss Swart, it's such a privilege to have you. I know we're on a time difference, so I don't want to keep you too long. You look great for a woman who's already been through most of the day, right?
Thank you so much. And if you don't mind, I would love the sunset on me. If you don't mind me.
I love it. You do it, man. I wish the sun could set on me. It ain't happening. So it's wonderful to have you on the show. I want to talk to you about, obviously, what your field of expertise is. And that is this reauthoring of a narrative, of either your personal narrative, your professional narrative, a national narrative. And I want to ask you first of all, what is reauthoring? What does that mean?
Mm-hmm. So I studied narrative therapy many moons ago. And that was one of the words amongst many that I thought was quite new for me. And the word comes from an American anthropologist, Barbara Meyerhoff. And in her research and the participants that she worked with, she wrote, they became the authors of themselves. And the two people that were originators of narrative therapy, Michael White from Australia and David Epstein from New Zealand, then took this word, and initially narrative therapy was called reauthoring therapy, because it was about how do we, like you said, take back the pen. How do we understand that as human beings, we are meaning makers and story makers? And that doesn't mean we make it up, but we are, if you think of the stars in the universe, and each star is a moment in our lives. And as human beings, we have the amazing capacity to weave meaning, to connect the dots and make a story from all of the meaning that we've made. And therefore, we are authoring our lives all the time. But we never, we just don't author like individual islands, although you've got beautiful islands, but we author in a particular context. So certain stories in certain cultures and contexts are preferred, and other stories are frowned upon, and people find themselves often as the outsiders. So our stories are also cast in a particular context. And then in that particular context, I think of my own life as Afrikaner woman, certain stories were allowed and preferred in my culture for women, and other stories not. And in the reauthoring effort, we take back the pen, but not in an individualistic way, like I did it my way. We always take it back in community. There's always a whole community, people, dead or alive, animals, things, spaces. I'm sitting here next to two beautiful wild syringa trees, and they've been a witness to my life in the last year doing this online business that we are doing right now. And they've been a witness to how the stories have shifted. And this is the beautiful hope for me, Nahaja, is that there is not one story. We live a multiplicity of stories. If we think of all our relatedness to all of life, all of those relationships carry stories. And therefore, there are always stories to choose from that we want more of. And for me, that's the piece of hope, both individually, collectively. There are always stories available that we want more of.
Why is it important to reauthor your life? Why is it important to take back the pen? Because I hear of you mentioning the stories, right? And some folks in their life, they have bad stories. Some got more bad stories than good stories. And for some reason, some folks find themselves, building and mask those bad stories. And there's psychology on that too. Why are some people drawn to such, negative experience, or why does negative experiences happen to them so often? But when we talk about the need to reauthor, why do we need to reauthor? For some, obviously, negative things happen, but why is it important to reauthor?
For me and my understanding, reauthoring is an invitation to become a participant in our lives. Not just that things are done unto us or happen to us, but that we are active agents in the writing of our lives, both individually and collectively. I think we're in a time in the world where we so often say this is just COVID, or this is just the way things are. This is just how we do it. This is always how it has been done. And for me, the best kept secret is that we are participants. We are co-authors, but we don't even know it. Every story we tell and retell is shaping a larger story. Our stories are not islands again. Always when I talk to people from the Bahamas, I'm like, the island.
That's okay. We understand.
It is so beautiful. And I'm back there with the beautiful
I can't wait till you come back. Yeah.
I definitely have withdrawal symptoms. So I think because we are all writing as a collective on this world, in this planet. We are all busy writing stories anyway. So reauthoring is an invitation to be conscious of the stories we are writing, the stories we are participating in, the stories we're coming alongside. What are the stories in the larger world that I want to co-author? And that doesn't mean that the vast and the continuum of all the stories aren't happening, but it's almost a knowing that if I am writing anyway, what do I want to be writing? And what kind of stories are important for me to be and to come alongside in this season in the world, which is quite extraordinary. Yeah. For instance, I'm a fresh gardener, a vegetable gardener. A year ago, when lockdown happened here in South Africa, all I could think of is I have to plant something. I have a story with great evidence that I cannot keep a plant alive. I would die if somebody at Mother's Day would give me a plant, because I'm afraid they'll come and visit again because they won't find it alive, or I'd give it to my mother who can keep things alive.
Yeah.
And so all that is a dominant story in my life. Then COVID comes along, and all of a sudden I have this urge to start the vegetable garden that I've always wanted to start. But I had two people in mind that would help me. With lockdown, they couldn't. So here I am, and I tried it. And a month later, things actually broke through the ground. And then all my plants are participants in co-authoring an alternative story of my relationship with the earth. Because our stories are all about our relatedness. So my relationship with the earth has completely changed in this year, has totally transformed in the possibility that the earth is gracious and forgiving, and that I can actually eat from the ground. But now it's not only just me in my vegetable gardener individualistic story, it's me in everyone that I've given from this garden, everyone that I've gifted, anything from this garden, seeds or plants or food, all of those. So I have family members that have now started a vegetable garden. And what am I also busy? I'm also busy co-authoring an alternative story that Ron Finley calls a revolution. So, in the beginning, people were saying, oh, that's so nice that you are keeping yourself busy in lockdown. That's so nice. It's such a nice hobby. And then Ron Finley, who doesn't talk beautiful language, he said, this is no hobby. This is a revolution.
Oh.
Because growing your own food is a revolution. Is busy with an alternative story of our relatedness to where our food comes from. Not big commercial farming there where we don't know what is the nutritional value. Now we know there's no pesticides, there's no chemical fertilizers used. So it's not just me and my garden story that is being reauthored, but I am busy co-authoring an alternative story around feeding ourselves. I don't know if this makes sense.
No, it does.
As an example.
Yeah. And you know what? It makes me ask the question then, is the reauthoring more of a spiritual journey? Or is it a spiritual and a logical process as well? Because I'll tell you, the islander, I can hear my audience now. Well, this sounds a little deep, little emotional and soft, right? That's what it sounds like. Yeah. Oh, this is this deep intellectual, philosophical thinking, but that has no tangible or logical process. Is the reauthoring process one that requires me to have a PhD to understand? And I'm only asking this because I know my audience, and I'm going to, they're like, okay, well, I hear you. the vegetable garden thing, I don't, and my audience would be like, listen, I planted a garden too. I didn't think it was reauthoring. I may have missed it. And so I want you, Shanae, if you can, help me understand, or help my audience and I both understand the process of reauthoring. Is this a process that requires some deep introspection and something that is achievable? And what are the benefits of it? There's a lot of questions in that, but I figure all of them.
Let's see. Save me, hey, if I don't get it right. So the process is firstly understanding that we have stories. We live stories, and we live a multiplicity of stories. Some stories in our lives, and we are in relationship to those stories. The stories are not inside of us. We don't have to dig deep and find the stories. The stories are in our relationships. They live in our relationships. They are made in our relationships. Okay. For instance, the story of my relationship with the earth, which was terrible. So firstly, so firstly, know that all of your relationship carries stories. And those stories have real effects. They have an influence on how you think about yourself, how you think about your relationship to your communities and your nations. They have an influence in your relationship to who you think you are in the world. Therefore, they are so powerful because they have this. We draw these conclusions. And firstly, you don't need. And this has been my life's work. So I thought I'll be a narrative therapist for the rest of my life. And these ideas were so revolutionary for myself that I thought I want to translate them for ordinary people. And so, yes, you don't need that degree. So firstly, normal people notice in your relationships, what are the stories I tell about my relationship to my partner, to the earth, to my community, to being a Bahamian or a South African? What are the stories? Ask yourself, what are the stories I'm telling? And how are those stories influencing my life? How is it influencing my choices? Where I go, what I buy, what I don't buy, what I think is success. And then ask yourself, because we notice our stories, then we notice who supports the stories. So let's think of stories about womanhood, for instance, in my culture. I remember in 2010 when I said to my family, I'm going to fly off to America for the first time for work. And they were like, a woman? Who's going to take care of the husband? Who's going to take care of the kids? Now, I can say, I'm a bit oversensitive, that I take that upon myself. No. There's a whole culture. There's a whole understanding of what a woman should do, what a woman should take responsibility for.
Yes.
So I'm also in relationship to the larger stories. So here I am in stories in my relationships, but I also have a relationship to my context, to what the world says is good and right for a woman and a mother and a wife.
Yeah.
And then I can, when I ask questions about it, I can see it and say, wow, how do I want to be in relationship to that? That is a question. And then I can ask a community, a bunch of other women, maybe men, and say, I want to understand my context. I want to understand how my people think, what is good and right. And then I can decide again, what is the relationship I want to have with that world.
Right. And with the world, and when you're saying that, with that world, with the role, the society's role of you being a wife, a mother, and what your societal norms are, right? The societal norms.
That's right.
And so you're saying, well, what is my relationship, or what type of relationship I want with that societal norm, right? Do I want that to be my story, or do I want to change my story to adjust to my life? Is that?
Or hold it a little bit lightly. I'm good with this part, but this part doesn't make sense
Right.
to me. Can I ask some questions then? Then obviously you have to renegotiate, hey, with the husband, the children.
Yes.
It's like, where's my mother? Where's my wife? and then the renegotiation starts. But in that renegotiation, we are reauthoring what womanhood looks like for us, what motherhood looks like in this relationship. I remember my child, my son. I've got two sons, and at some point he need to make a very important decision, and he was still in primary school. And he said, what do you say? And I said, I don't know, because this is part of this practice, is that I see people as the primary authors of their stories, even a child. And so he asked me, what do I think? And I said, I can't decide for you. I can't say. And he said, you're my mother. You have to tell me. And then I said, well, I'm going to tell you what I think, but you still have to tell me if that was useful to you or not. And so in this process of reauthoring, we see people as the experts of their lives. We think that they have a treasure chest of stories that they can draw from, that they can know what is important and what matters in their lives. And we, all our questions set people up to be the primary authors of their lives. And that's quite a revolutionary idea, because the world has so much in mind for us.
Yes.
It's like, oh, you should be doing that, and you should have been doing that already by this time. and people live quite extraordinary lives. And if we dare to listen and dare to ask questions that people don't know the answer, and you don't know the answer, it's a magical where it can take us.
We're going to take
but I don't know. Did I answer your question?
To some degree. Don't worry. We got time. And so we'll get even further into it, right? We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to have more with Shanae Swart talking about reauthoring, right? The reauthoring of our narrative, our life's narrative, and then digging into the national narrative and leadership. How do we then begin to reauthor something like the Bahamas' narrative as a country, as a whole, right? How do we begin to see ourselves differently, more from a place of abundance than lack, from a place of confidence rather than insecurity? How do we change the negative narratives that we have about ourselves, right? So that it can change and fuel the way we behave as a people. You're listening to the Hit Back with Nahaja Black, Guardian Radio 96.9 FM. And I want you guys to stay tuned. This is going to continue to be quite an interesting conversation. And that's what I'm looking forward to. More of this. You're listening to the Hit Back with Nahaja Black, Guardian Radio. To the Hit Back with Nahaja Black, Guardian Radio 96.9 FM. Shanae Swart joining us, author of Reauthoring the World. I have this here. Where did I put your book? I got your book, Miss Swart, and I got it ready because, one of my, there it is. Hold on. I'm going to share it right now on the screen. A great book here by Miss Swart, Reauthoring the World, the narrative lens and practices for organizations, communities, and individuals. You can go on Amazon right now and purchase the book. You can also buy it. I think it's hardback, $21. I like books in hand. That's just me. I like to feel my books. But then, shipping issues. Sometimes I'm just like, put it on the Kindle. That's just, I just kindle. Miss Swart, welcome back to the Hit Back. It's a pleasure to have you again. Okay, we're talking about reauthoring and the lenses and the narratives, these things that you've mentioned in some of your writings. And there's one particular one that I wanted to, a particular section in an article that you wrote called Reauthoring the World, Unfolding Ideas and Practices. And you said something here when we talk about deconstructing social, and I'm going through the pages, one second. Deconstructing social discourses, right? You mentioned here, after this unpacking process, the team started referring, okay, so in the past 6 years, nope, that's not it. There's so many parts of this that there's so many parts of it. I'm trying to stay focused, but there was so much in this, I should have marked it. All right. The reauthoring practices bring into focus the unique context that these moments take place and help organizations and communities to see and know how they shape the context and are shaped by the context. In a sense, these practices provide authorship and relationship with the context. And that's not even what I was looking for there. So I made a mistake. I got to find it for me because it was so powerful, the phrasing of it. And I thought I had it sidelined, marked out. So I must, please forgive me because I thought I had it marked out and obviously I didn't have it marked out. So now I'm losing focus on it. It was the point of what you wrote though, was that we are within the deconstructing of the social discourses, right? The social constructs of life is that we don't know we're in it. Right. And you brought up the analogy of the fish in the water, right? Like what the hell is water? Right. Exactly. We don't know we're in social norms because they came through structural histories. This is legacy. So what we consider norm or status quo, we don't ask questions about it. And you can see it in organizations as well, in communities. You brought that all in, is that we don't know that we are in someone else's narrative. And it's so fascinating that you mentioned that because I look at us as a colonial nation, right? As a colonized people, formerly colonized people, but I still say that we still have that narrative on us, that the way business is done, the way we view ourselves as a country where we believe that foreign is better, that we go carte blanche and treat foreigners different from ourselves. They get better preferences. They get the concessions. These are things that where Bahamians feel as if they are second class in their own country because the red carpet isn't rolled out to us. But and these were social. I think that's why some of our behavior is that we cater, right? We are and there's nothing wrong with great service, but is that is our catering nature. But there's now growing resentment. I wonder, when you talk about social discourses and the norms, elaborate a bit on that for us, please, to get an understanding of what that means when you talk about powers and structures.
Mm-hmm. And so I think the most important thing is that because it's hidden, exactly like the story of the three fishes, and the two young fishes saying, "What the hell is water?" What exposes the water is when we dare to ask questions about it. So the moment somebody says, "This is just the way things are," you have work to do immediately.
Can I just say, we have this thing now, and it's been going on a lot during the pandemic.
Yeah.
Even our commissioner of police saying it is what it is. When we question some issues with, okay, why is this behavior happening? Oh, it is what it is. And it's become a part of our lexicon more so this past year. And you mentioned something and I was like, oh, for God's sake. Oh, we got some work to do, but continue your thought.
Yeah. So it is what it is. What is what it is?
Yeah.
Then we start asking questions. Just use the language people are using. So what is what it is? how did it come about that this is the way things are?
Mm-hmm.
Who benefits if it stays this way?
Mm-hmm.
How does what is influencing how we come together, how we think of one another, how we bring things to one another, how what our future is. And so when it comes to those kinds of questions we can ask, firstly we can unpack and we can say, what is?
Yeah.
Just like we assume that we know what that is, but
Mm-hmm.
what is it?
Yeah.
So then unpack that just in
That's
language.
deep.
When anybody says this is just the way things are, what is just the way things are?
Mm.
And then you can ask about the history. Then you can say, how long has this been like this?
Mm-hmm.
And then you can ask powerful questions like, who benefits if it stays this way? Then you can also ask, how does it influence? Influence is the fourth kind of question you can ask. What does it do to me if this is the way things are? What does it do to our community or our island when this is just the way things are? And then we can also ask, are there also times when things are different than this? What's on the other side of this? Because I always believe that the emerging alternative are always there. When somebody says, this is just the way things are, we always know that there's also an alternative story. It might not be on the stage of the world, it might not be powerful people living it, but there's always an alternative. And then we can say, where is it happening that it is not like this? Those are some of the questions you can ask. Does it make sense, Nahaja?
Yeah, no, it does. And I think that question of why is it the way it is? Why that is a big one. Like, why is it this way? Why is it, why is what it is? And then who benefits from it being what it is? Those are powerful questions, man. But just the whole thing of why is it this way? Why?
Yeah.
And that's one of the things or challenges that we have here is when we question. When I say challenges we have here is that questioning doesn't get us answers. It gets us rebuffed in society. You question and people grow silent or they counter question. And so the reauthoring as a whole and you've touched on this, and I want to get there. And when you talk about organizational and leadership styles in terms of narratives, but as a South African, I gather you've seen, well, there's rich history, right? There's rich history, as is the Bahamas, but we just don't really dive into our history well enough, right? But there's a rich history as a South African. And I wonder, when you look at as a nation, have you guys reauthored yourselves? How would you say the reauthoring process? I know. There's been some changes in the story.
Yeah.
There's definitely been some.
We're at 25. Well, how old are we now? 94. So we're 20. Oh, my math's not that well. 27, 26. We're a young nation.
Yeah.
Of coming together.
Mm-hmm.
And it's wild and wonderful. It has the grief and the joy living next to one another. It has moments when we see the new South Africa. We had a World Cup rugby tournament, and we had our first Black captain. Yeah. And it was that moment when there is a diverse group of players on the field having relationship with one another in different ways than we've been before. And then it is an alternative. Just the mere fact of how they've come together and chosen that it's not about winning, but about giving hope. Mm-hmm. And so in the larger narrative of every nation, I believe there are stories that are moving and shifting that gives us an inkling of the possibility of what we want more of. Mm-hmm. An example. And then there are stories that are like, how did this one stay alive so long? Come on,
Yes, yes.
we're into this new dispensation. It sounds like way back when.
Mhm.
And I think when we are in small conversations, like dinner or lunch conversations, Sunday lunch conversations, it is important for us to notice what are the stories we are retelling around the table about who we are.
Mhm.
Um, and I would say there are pockets of South African society that are busy co-authoring an alternative narrative. They are living an alternative. They don't have the media necessarily, but in small interactions, in small local actions, they are living an alternative narrative. And then there are the larger stories that get to stand on the stage of the media and the world. And sometimes we believe they are the only stories. And they often dominant problem stories. And then when we want to tell an alternative, people say, oh, that's just an exception. Boy, in any research study, if you have an exception, you have a problem. Because then the possibility is there for an alternative to become greater.
Yeah.
And so I think when I'm, as a citizen of this country, when I'm around the table, I'm always aware and listening to what are the stories we're telling about who we are. How is this influencing our conversation? And alongside which narratives are we coming in this conversation? Am I willing to bring an alternative story, a different story about who we are? Am I willing to dare? Sometimes I'm the outsider also, when I dare to bring an alternative story. When somebody says, yes, this is just the way things are, here we go. This is how it's always been. It used to be better. And then I said, but can I offer an alternative story? And so I see our work as holding a treasure chest of alternative stories, always listening, always asking questions, always also challenging those problem stories to say, well, if we as a nation consistently believe this and retell this and believe that that's the only story and possibility about who we are, where will we end up? And so in a certain sense, facilitating conversations is almost also busy reauthoring and co-authoring the possibilities of what we are talking about when we come together as families and larger extended families and friends.
If you're just tuning in, Shanae Swart talking about reauthoring. Reauthoring the World is her book. You can buy it on Amazon. She didn't tell me to tell you that, obviously. You know, this is not a book sale show. Just a really interesting conversation. Okay, so Ms. Swart, there was something that I wanted to share as well, right? And this is from an article that you did, reauthoring leadership narratives within organizations, right? And you did, there was a part of this that I wanted to start here where, what is water? You start off, there are two young fish swimming along, and they happen to meet an older fish swimming the other way, who nods at them and says, morning, boys, how's the water? And the two young fish swim on for a bit, and then eventually one of them looks over at the other and goes, what the hell is water? Right? What is water? What is the water that organizations and leaders are finding themselves in? How can we see the water or know it? Why does it matter? What the hell is water? The way we speak, think, and act do not fall from the sky. Leaders and organizations are shaped by the communities and histories they come from, and the cities, nations, and economic systems that have formed them, as well as the ideas of the global world that they form part of through access of technology. And you cite your book, page 349 of your book. We grow up in these communities and societies, and we take for granted that our way of being and doing is the way things are. The way things are becomes normal to the point that we do not even realize that we are swimming in water, because these taken for granted ideas and beliefs are carried by language and embodied in all of us. We become part of, join in with, are thrown into a way of talking and being that precedes us. One is already embedded in a tradition of being. We inherit a vocabulary that is a way of being, so that our language speaks us rather than us speaking our language. That's deep. Contrary to the conduit theory of language, ideas do not exist in the mind prior to being formed into speech. The language we inherit is in the context that allows concepts to become taken for granted. And you cite Barrett. And one last paragraph. Why do we know? Why do we know that we are swimming in water? Over the years, our ways of thinking and doing become divorced from the history, culture, and worlds that have grown from, as they attain some form of truth status, presenting itself as the way things are or as normal. These taken for granted beliefs and ideas hide their history and also hide how they are informed by people in our societies who are perceived to have knowledge and stand in positions of authority. Can I just say that that right there is the start of my hallelujah dance, right? Like, I'm like, yes, right? This is okay. I get it. I get to some point. I get it. That our history, and that's what we've been hitting on, really, is that this is who we are, the stories, our relationship with our environment today, our narrative is directly linked to our relationships, right? And the relationship of our family. So and it's so powerful. Just, you know, as the more I learn, it just hits like light bulbs, right? And I get it. Because what you're saying is, okay, Ms. Schwartz, is that, hey, listen, you get a narrative or an idea or a perception of yourself, perception of your country, perception of your family from your family. But they get that same perception from their family, from their country, and they're just sending it down generation upon generation upon generation. But then there's a moment in every adult life as we mature where you're saying, hey, we hit a point where, but it is what it is. But why is it? Like, at some point, are we like, we're hit with a notion or a potion and like, but this ain't feel right.
Yeah, and I believe everyone, and that's the beauty of it. Otherwise, we're overtaken by it. You know,
Yeah.
then we can just give up because this is just the way it's fact, and everybody is in the darkness.
Yeah.
But it doesn't work like that. We always show up and transform the systems that order us about, even if it's a small act of protest, a small act of refusal. Where in womanhood, for instance, honey, I'm not coming home tonight. I am gonna go out and read a book, and I'm gonna be a better mother and wife when I come back.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
That's a small act of protest to the larger ideas and beliefs about a good mother and a good wife, for instance.
Yes.
For instance.
Yes.
The way things are, you know, here in our country, we moan and groan when we have lunches as families.
Lunches? Oh.
you know, Sunday lunches.
Yes,
when we all come together, we make a big fire, we have a barbecue with real wood, and it's usually a moaning session about the terrible government we have.
Yes.
Okay, so my act of protest refuses to bring an alternative story to say, did you hear about this?
Mm-hmm.
How fascinating is it? What would happen in our country if more stories like that happen and more protests and actions like these happen? So for me, that we're the whole time hold these stories and are offered these stories and can challenge these stories. It's almost sometimes when people unpack these beliefs and ideas, they think that they're committing some form of sin or something. They're doing something wrong, you know, because it's an expose almost. It's like you're catching something out that have been with us for so long. And how dare you ask a question about it? But if we want to live into a nation story of abundance, of which, I mean, when I think of the Bahamas, I think of abundance. I was at the island of Andros. My goodness,
Yes.
grief.
Oh my God.
It's like abundance around every corner. It's in the soil and the waters. It's everywhere.
Mangroves everywhere. Yeah.
Yes, and then what is that story of abundance saying to the story of scarcity, that we are not enough, to a history that says we are not enough? What is the mangroves inviting us to do? What would happen if the mangroves can speak?
Yay.
What would they say to the Bahamian people?
Yes.
If we ask them, and they've been a witness to your unfolding as a nation over, I don't know, forever, most probably.
Yes. You know, and so it brings the question of how do we reshape the because I've said it, you know, we cry about our leadership within the country, right? And then I said, but our leaders were born out of us, right? They are our sons, our daughters,
and we vote for them.
Yes, exactly. Right. So they were just, are they a reflection of us? And the argument will be, well, they're maintaining the status quo, right? And that's where the friction comes, because the status quo was no longer acceptable because it butts the head of the truth. The truth is that we are a country in you know, with its issues, where the status quo cannot be maintained if the rest is not you know, being maintained as well.
It needs all of us to keep it in place.
Yes, it does, right? And so greed has allowed the status quo to fall into ruin. It's in jeopardy, I tell you that. So, Ms. Ward, then, when we look at our, and you do this with organizational leadership, and you said this in your article that, hey, leaders don't fall out of the sky. I mean, they're a part of, and I want to make sure I quote you correctly. Leaders and organizations are shaped by the communities and histories they come from, and the cities, nations, and economic systems that have formed them, as well as the ideas of the global world that they form part of through access of technology. When you look at a country like ours, or, you know, as a, you know, when you look at leadership, and I gotta ask that, how do we reauthor our leadership style? Right now, we have a leadership style that's dismissive. Many would say disrespectful to the mass of Bahamian people. So we say one thing and do the total opposite, and then tell you didn't appreciate what I did. I thought you wanted that. It's very much gaslighting at its best, right? How do we reauthor the way we lead our leadership style, and what Bahamians should consider appropriate leadership?
So I just came out of 2 days of working with young leaders in Denmark, and 2 days of reauthoring leadership, a workshop with them. And one of them said, leadership is not a thing. Leadership is a relationship between us.
Yes.
A living relationship. And therefore, in a certain sense, we are all leading. If leadership is a relationship, then in our families, we are leaders. In our relationship to the earth, we are leaders. In our relationship with one another, in our communities, we are leaders. And what I think is that there is a unique story of leadership for each of us as we are leading. And if the uniqueness of the diversity of leadership stories are allowed to be invited into how we make our world as nations, then imagine what would be possible. There's not just this dominant understanding of this is a leader, this is what they do, but if we're all taking ownership of leadership wherever we are, then something dramatically will shift also for those that are so-called at the top. I think, especially in this amazing time that we are living in this pandemic, that the world is all made up. we make up the world.
Yes.
And so what would happen if we are no longer waiting for leaders to do their thing, that we know how they do it, but if we all take responsibility in leading in the relationships that we were given, with the gifts that we are given, and the unique leadership stories that we all have, what would happen if we take up the pen in the writing of leadership in our own unique way, not in the way that we've been handed leadership over so many centuries, which also come from a source. I think for me, that's the invitation. It's time for the diversity and the uniqueness of leadership that grows from wonderful relationships that we have with all that matters to us deeply. But I don't know, is that an answer to your question, Nahaja?
When you said it, that okay, how do we? So, in terms of looking at leadership in a macro position, you're saying, in essence, let's look at it in a micro situation. Like, how do we? Because I totally agree with you. Because if we truly believe that our leaders come from within us, from out of us, out of the belly of the communities, out of the belly of the cities, within the economic structures and the parameters in which are created from stories and narratives that have been set for generations, then that means that we have to, as a people, individually in our families, begin to retell that story. And for the retelling of the story is one that I gather, like you mentioned when you talk about your son, is also individual as well. So like I wonder, from a family's perspective, as a mother, a wife, my husband and I, we have 3 kids, and we want to ensure that they have a spirit of abundance, right? That they never see lack as a problem, but rather as an opportunity to solve a problem, right? Never seeing not enough, but more than enough, and being problem solvers, right? That's one of our things, right? That's what we want to teach them, but we don't want our goals, dreams, and aspirations to be theirs. We want to help shape a story where the theme is abundance, right? But we want to make sure that we're not writing the words on their pages in terms of authoring their life. How do you strike a balance when we're talking, even in the micro sense, about that reauthoring?
Well, listening closely to how they name the world, that is the first step. How do they speak about their dreams, and how do in a 4-year-old's language or a 7-year-old's language, how do they speak about the stories that they would want more of, and that they love, and the relationships that matter to them, and then ask them, how can we make this story bigger with you?
Yeah.
And in that sense, for me, that is leadership. Leadership is enabling and creating the conditions for stories to flourish, and for stories to become more. And so for me, that is an attentive listening to how our children name the world, and not bringing our grand words on them. So what you're saying is one day you want to be a professional, blah, blah, blah. But to use their language and their imagery of the world and their naming of the world, and to ask about that, and to say, how can we come alongside this, whatever they've called it, this naming, this dream. And for me, that's a form of leadership, as enabling environments where people can flourish.
In our communities, when we look at it, and we're going to take a break in a minute. Actually, let's take the break. When we come back, let's dive in some more. We're with Shanae Swart joining us, author Shanae Swart, expert in reauthoring. And I think you said, is it the reauthoring narrative therapy? Reauthoring being the premise, the namesake, I guess you would say, the name of this theory, of this therapy, this narrative reauthoring therapy here that uses, and she uses so well globally. You know, she's a very very well-known professional, talking with Dutch students. She was in Nova Scotia the other day. Look at her go, you know, and I'm just sitting here hoping to see the sunset on her in South Africa. We'll take a break.
Better come.
I know. You're listening to The Hit Bag with Nahaja Black, Guardian Radio, 96.9 FM. We'll be back right after this. And we're back. You're listening to The Hit Back with Nahaja Black. Shanae Swart joining us all the way from South Africa, author of Reauthoring the World, changing the global narrative, man, changing the narrative, retelling our stories. And I think, of course, just knowing that you have a story to tell and reshape. Okay, Ms. Swart, I have to ask this question now. When people hear about retelling their stories, right? I wonder how much of it is true when folks have limiting stories, right? Like if you, in your therapy, and you look at human beings as individuals, some folks have a lot of baggage that they carry. And a lot of it has some limiting beliefs, right? Like, listen, there's nothing I have to offer to this world. You know, nothing good happens to me. Everything that has happened, then we use those phrases, everything, always, never, that have happened to us, happened to me, has been bad. I'm just not lucky. I don't win anything. You know, this sort of mindset. And I wonder, how would you approach an individual? Because we've talked about it from an organizational standpoint, a community, and we could go deeper. And I wanted to, in the last segment, just go back to that in terms of business and organizational stuff. But in the individual position, and in the context for us in the Bahamas, where people, again, feel as if, listen, nothing's working out, it ain't working. You know, the system is a kind of oppressive in the way, in the economic sense, not in the democratic sense, but in the economic sense. What would you say in your therapy to someone like that?
So we don't see a person as the problem. We don't believe the problem's inside of you. We say the problem is the problem. And the problems are informed by whole context. The fact that we think that we are not good enough, we're not here for something special, or that we bring gifts, is not by accident. It is by the beliefs and ideas of the context that we come from.
Wow.
And that have told us through what they value in the media, through education, sometimes in the teaching. You know, you're not an academic, so you're less than. Mm-hmm. And so the problems are not situated inside of us. So in a process with an individual, we separate that person from the problem. And we look at a context that have created a problem story. And so we ask questions about the problem. Say, for instance, a person has not good enough. I'm not good enough. Mm-hmm. We would ask questions like, when first did you notice not good enough entering your life.
Wow.
Because problem stories want us to believe that we've been there all along. It's been
That's
there
right.
from birth. You were born like this. But so it doesn't give you any room to move. And so when we start with a history question saying, when first did you notice not good enough? In that moment, you are not good enough. You are in relationship to a story. And then then another kind of question we can ask is, were there also times when not good enough was not present or not equally strong? And people would say, oh, there was this one time, when I was there and doing that. And then we can ask a lot of questions. How was that possible? If we rate not good enough and say, if you would sit here with me today and not good enough, if you would rate not good enough's presence in your life, and we make it 10 out of 10. Is it a 10? Is it a 7? Is it a 3? And mostly people don't say 10, they say 8 or 7. And then we say, whoa, there's a 2 or a 3 we can work with. How is that possible that it's not totally overtaking your life? And then we can also ask society, what are the things in our school systems, in our economic systems, in our way of living that invite people to end up feeling I am not good enough. And so therefore, the moment and so we're very cautious of not talking about limiting beliefs in this sense, because what we are doing is we are problematizing people and internalizing the problem story all over again. And we say, oh, you just have a limiting belief that you are not good enough in the world. Then we're putting the problem back on them.
The person.
Again, it's a trap.
Interesting.
Now, you're not only not good enough, you're also not good enough because you have a limiting belief. It's a no-win situation.
Yes.
And so we don't talk about limiting belief. We talk about contextual or societal beliefs and ideas, and saying what is happening out there. What is society thinking about success? For instance, when are people considered good enough? And so in that sense, we are challenging what society has come up with, an expression of good enough, and saying if there are other times when you lived in a way that you are proud of, what was possible then, and what happened to not good enough in that moment. So we firstly listen to the way people name their world and the problem story. We separate them from the problem story. We say that problem stories are informed by a whole context that keeps stories alive and that supports stories. And then we ask, are there also moments that were other, where not good enough didn't have the last say in your life?
Yeah. And this is, I love that you said that, because I think it's fascinating where you say we're putting those limiting beliefs on it, and that was just a no-win situation. Then here we are now, right? If you're just tuning in, Shanae Swart, author of Reauthorizing, and make sure I got this right, Reauthorizing the World. You can get it, of course, on Amazon. She's also a noted speaker. She goes out and does all of her training. Well, before COVID, right? She would go out and do a lot of training around the world in this theory. And what do you call it? Is it a therapy? You call it a therapy, right?
So all of these ideas come from narrative therapy. And narrative therapy is a set of practices, so things we do, kinds of questions we ask, how we see people. We see, and that is quite, for me, revolutionary. We don't see people as we don't see people that problems are situated in and internalized. We see people as separate from problems. We see people as holding a treasure chest of the multiplicity of stories that they could live from. We also see people as connected to a community.
Mhm.
And those communities, sometimes people forget, because of all of these beliefs and ideas, people forget who they are and what matters to them. And then in those instances, we always call on a community. We say, who in your life supports you? Who in your life would not be surprised that you are living an alternative story, daring to do something different?
Mhm.
And then they would say, my aunt won't be surprised. And then we say, so which moment in your life would your aunt take us to? And so in a certain sense, it's a way we see humanity as beautiful, dignified human beings that are on the way of becoming. Not becoming as an end result, but always moving and shifting in our relationship to stories. So it sees humanity in a particular way. It sees humanity that are also in relationship to context. It also has a bunch of practices that always holds the dignity, that wants to ignite the beauty, the dignity, and the honor of humanity and all of their relationships. So in a certain sense, a way to see and a way to do.
Yeah, and I love that, because that holistic look, that dignified approach is, to me, the reshaping of a mindset, right? Like to one where we are individual yet whole, right? The same, where we're connected because we understand the value of each other in the story, in our relationship with each other. How difficult. And I want to read another part of what you wrote. This one, again, you guys can visit her website. The website is transformations with an s.co.za, transformations.co.za. You can visit the website for Madam Shanae Swart, author, noted speaker, trainer, exceptional human being. You can feel free to join her there. But here is something that you said in this article, and I need to remember this article here. Okay, so, and I'll open it up for my audience just a little bit online so that they can see it just a tad bit better. You said, when we start to see the beliefs and ideas for what they are, we can unpack and deconstruct the truths, practices, and vocabularies of the context so that they can be more explicitly known. This water is not innocent because it has huge implications on, let me make sure, for what is called, wait, hold on, let me see, I read that wrong. This water is not innocent because it has huge implications for what is called for in a particular time when it comes to leadership and organizational work. Therefore, the meaning we make about our own identities, work, leadership, and organizations are informed by ideas and beliefs of the water we swim in. Let's start unpacking some of the important taken for granted beliefs and ideas that impact organizations and leaders. Scarcity, Saunders in 2013, is one of the dominant taken for granted beliefs and ideas that daily hums that there is not enough for everyone in our business and organizational world. There are not enough resources, time, profit, product, compliance, talent, market share, growth, alignment, skills, and innovation, which sometimes leads to an inhumane pace, anxiety, competitiveness, and fatigue in some organizations. Secondly, the taken for granted beliefs and ideas that dominate organizations and still largely influenced by the thinking practices and structures of a world that is seen as static, certain, and predictable, and therefore needs command and control leadership. Within such a world, organizations and leaders are often called upon and interested in discovering best practices, benchmarking against world-class organizations, collecting the right data, and continual searches for the singular expertise. Because this orientation tends to search for the right answer, best solution, and so on, there is also an implicit tendency to seek out experts who can supply tested solutions. These beliefs come at a price because by the time evidence is collected to create best practices, the conditions have changed enough to make them likely obsolete. This is so, so Bahamian. Within this understanding, leaders are headhunted to apply the best practice and turnaround strategy that was successful in their previous organization, sometimes as is in the next context. Another taken for granted belief and idea that influences the organizational world is the notion of the individual self, especially in leadership, that requires leaders to trade themselves as a commodity or property to be owned, and whose personal resources and strengths can and should be used and developed to full capacity. Therefore, we have numerous leadership styles and forms of assessment to categorize and place leaders on a range of continuums, tables, and scales in which they are induced to work to close the gap between these locations and the understanding of what is currently considered normal and the human nature of a good leader. When we can measure leaders according to table performance, we can also design the appropriate development path for them. When leaders do not shape according to the standard norm of a particular organization, problematization sets in, and the individual leader sometimes becomes the sole focus and object of blame for problems in the organization. These messages of deficiency draw a static line in the sand for the leader and remove the responsibility for thinking and deeper conversation about the water that is influencing and impacting in this situation. Wow. Look, can I just say wow again? Wow. I love it. Love it. Okay. So with all of that, those 3 points and factors of leadership, right? And we go back to this because I think this is a very important point. We talk about it in micro and a macro, but you talk about the water. Like, and we go back to the analogy you have of the two small fishes swimming by, one fish swims past and say, how's the water today? Or something like that. And one of the fish looks to the other fish and says, what the hell is water? Right? Like we're so in it, we don't notice it. It is what it is, right? That's the statement of Bahamian lexicon. It is what it is, right? You're saying, Ms. Swart, that we need to question just the whole thing. Question the water. The water isn't innocent. The water, the economic system, the way we have this, where poverty is a construct of we believe in our society. We quote scripture a lot, right? The poor will always be among us, right? That's the scripture. We use that a lot. And I wonder if that is just our way of saying that we're not going to address poverty, right? Like we're not interested in solving it because poverty is an indication of your lack of ability, not in the constraints of the environment that,
So that it has, it's a product of colonial histories.
Thank you. Right? So question the water.
And that is hidden just there. Because if we think in individualized ways, we think, oh, that person is just poor.
Yeah.
Or that's a generational poverty.
Yes.
Where did it start?
And that's it, right? Questioning the water, right? And that to me is so powerful. How do we, oh my goodness.
And then quoting Jesus in the process.
What?
I've heard a theologian say that is a wrong interpretation of what Jesus said.
It is.
So that's the thing. Now we quote and we never question.
Mm-hmm.
Surely
yeah.
That is not what Jesus meant. But I can't go in the theological discussion about that. But for instance, that is now we quote God.
Yes.
in accepting that we would always have the poor, and we don't work towards ways that shifts that story, that says no, maybe that is not the only story. maybe we can be a community that cares in different ways, and that writes a different story about our relationship to people. And so-called poverty, and poverty is also a word we made up.
Oh.
And yes, and then people say, oh, it goes back to the Bible. So that means it must be true and right now.
Mhm.
Anyway,
No,
you can get me. Yep, you can get me.
no, I'm loving this. You keep going because see, this is the type, this is where I think the reauthoring is so important, and it's so, man, I think there's like a surgery of reauthoring that needs to go on, right? And as a South African, you understand that, we are part of the Commonwealth, right? Colonialism is a part of our, or both our heritage, right? We know the Queen and, and all that comes with it. And
You know what Trevor Noah says about the Commonwealth?
what does he say?
Where the wealth is only in one place.
That's the only thing that's common. I'm telling you, it's in one place. And so true, right? Because all the resources get funneled out and it just leaves, and that's just the Commonwealth. I think, because Behemoth will tell you today, Miss Swart, that we don't know what the Commonwealth is about in terms of any sort of benefit to the Bahamian people. There is zero benefit. We're almost certain. We still need a visa to go to Britain. So I mean,
same with us.
Oh yeah,
same with us.
And they don't want us, right? You can come to visit, but don't come to stay. But we digress. So in the narrative, the reauthoring, right? The reauthoring, and I listening to you, and that's why I'm so happy you're here. I get a sense from us that, and from this conversation, that reauthoring is an intricate work. If we're talking nationally, that's even deeper, right? Because there are social implications in our discussion. So, I talk a lot of economics on my show because for me, that's very important, but also the social issues, right? So mental health is a big thing for me, that we are, as a people, we are able to look within ourselves and determine what we want, who we are as a people. I think before you can even talk about who's going to be the next government, what policies, what issues matter to you? And what do you want those people to represent? I mean, what does good leadership look like? If we can't answer those questions, then we're going to panic buy a leader every 5 years. That's what I call it, right? Panic buying. We panic shop with leader because we just don't want the other guy. And we go back and forth. And because we don't have policies, or we understand who we want to be in the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years, we're not listening for key indicators, and we're not standing on our principles when we vote. And that's a whole reasoning behind, I believe, we keep getting what we get. And that's just to give you that's a quick overview of us. But that in this reauthoring dynamic, Ms. Swart, what are the steps would you give to a country? If you were talking with, I want to know, you were talking to the leader and you were talking to the members of parliament, and you were talking to the cabinet ministers,
Okay, I haven't done that.
You probably will soon. We need you
but
to.
I'm using the imagination now. Standing in parliament.
I would love it, right? That you were sitting in the cabinet meeting and you're saying, listen, we're going to have an organizational meeting and we're going to talk about leadership. Okay. What would be the steps that you would give them? What would be some of the questions that you would ask so that we can start reauthoring the Bahamas?
So firstly, what is the story we tell about who we are? Let's just first start with that. In all its diversity, let's just look it in the eye. What is the story we tell about the Bahamian people?
The story that we tell within the country, or the story we tell other people outside of the country? Because we tell a different story outside.
Inside.
Okay, inside.
What are we? And then put it up, and all its diversity. Look the stories in the eye that we tell. Because if we do that, then we can say what kind of leadership we might need. So firstly, what are the stories we tell? And put them all up. Then ask the question, what supports these kinds of stories? And when they're problem stories, what is in the context that supports these kinds of stories?
So when you say
structurally, historically, economically, what are the structures and the institutionalized things that supports these kinds of stories?
May I, one question, because I want to add to that.
Yeah.
I want to,
yes,
because one of those stories is, okay, we are only or mainly good at tourism. We don't create anything else. We don't innovate. We don't, we only have one real source of income, and that's tourism. And our financial system is failing. This is some of the things that and financial system is secondary, but it's failing. And I wonder if you heard that, because that's one of the challenges that we have, where we're building on this fickle industry. We've built on it, and COVID has taught us that it can't be it, right? Mm-hmm. If you heard that, maybe that's too minutia. Maybe I'm taking you down a rabbit hole.
No. So that would be, so each one of these stories, they're like the economic system or tourism. We're only good enough for tourism. Like that's how the story goes. That's the title. Each of these stories can be unpacked and say, where did the story come from? How does it influence our identity as a nation to say, when we say we are only good enough for tourism? We can also ask, what are the global structures that support the story that we are only good enough for tourism? What's also the larger stories that supports this story? Then we can also ask, are there also emerging alternative narratives? Are there also stories right now, especially in COVID, that emerged because the we are only good for tourism story couldn't play? And go on a hunt for those stories. What happened in COVID time when we couldn't just be good enough for tourism? What were the emerging alternatives that came and rose in this time? Yes. And what are they teaching us about who we are and what we're good for and what we love? Yes. And what kind of future we have in mind for ourselves? And that would be a short process.
No, but that's excellent, because even in that, what other stories emerged and what we found was this ingenuity, right? Where folks were like, listen, we're going to do what we can. And I mean, we became more versatile. Bahamians were able to change on a dime and how we did business and switching to more mobile business options.
And what a challenge is that to, this is just the way things are.
Yeah. Oh, it challenged the status quo. Oh, it challenged the status quo.
No way, sister.
It did, because now we were finding, you need permits to do this and you needed permits to do that. And it was becoming a whole legal wrangling where people were saying, well, we're adjusting, we're changing. And this broke the status quo. And we're finding that people are trying to be beaten back into the status quo, right? And when we say beaten, not literally, but there are systems that are trying to, oh, no, you can't do this. You can't do that. You can't. And where Bahamians are saying, but what else can we do right now in terms of there is no tourism, and listen, one day when we're off air and the time difference isn't as bad as it is now, because I know it's late where you are now, I'll give you some side stories off air.
Fantastic. But it's amazing. Look at all of these alternatives.
Yeah.
And so the questions you can ask about the alternatives that you said that emerged. What are the gifts of the Bahamian people that are shining through in these? What are the communities? What were the practices of these communities? What did these communities do for this alternative story to live? Who can come alongside these stories? Who can retell these stories? Are they available for us around our dinner tables and lunch tables to retell the stories? Did you know, like a good gossip? Did you know the Bahamian people are busy with this, and they're busy with this, and they're busy with this? What is that saying? And then cast it into the future. What would happen if these kinds of stories get more of an opportunity to live and to see the light and to enjoy the beauty of these islands? Yes. What would happen into the future? What becomes possible?
I love it.
Something like that.
No, and that's what is so interesting, because I think the reauthoring is a process where it has to start. You know what? Let's take a quick break. Last segment, let's take a quick break. When we come back, I want to ask, in a society, does the reauthoring happen? Should it happen at the top or should it happen at the bottom? Or is it somewhere in the middle? Like how do we reshape an entire country? This is on you now, Ms. Swart, right? We're talking about changing and reauthoring and giving people the boldness to reauthor, not just to be in the water, but to say, hold on, what the hell is water? Like, hold on. This isn't fitting me anymore. This is not working. This is whatever this is. It ain't what it is. It's not working anymore. The status quo has to change. How do we get to the space where we say, okay, listen, I'm not happy with the way my life is shaping out. The social norms are not working out for me. The organizational structure of my business isn't working out for me. The leadership style that I have or others have isn't working. How do I begin to reauthor and not just let life happen to me? And does that start at the bottom or does that start at the top of the chart? Right? We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, more with Shanae Swart. I don't know where I get Sheann from. Who was that? Shanae Swart, author of Reauthorizing the World, also a noted speaker, a trainer in organizational leadership. We're talking about reauthorizing narrative therapy. This is exciting stuff, man. I can't wait for you guys to get a little bit more of this. You're listening to the Hit Back with Nahaja Black, Guardian Radio, 96.9 FM. And we're back. You're listening to the Hit Back with Nahaja Black. Shanae Swart joining us all the way from South Africa. I know the time change is the time difference is big. It's a 6-hour difference. And so I appreciate the fact that you're doing the show with me. I thank you so much, Ms. Swart.
It's a great honor.
The honor is all mine.
Fun.
Good. I'm happy that you're enjoying the conversation, right?
Yeah, we're sitting in Parliament and all of that fancy stuff.
And I see it soon because I think that this conversation and that the mindset, and I think in particular for colonialized nations, right? So I have a vision, dream, Ms. Swart. I have a dream, Mr. Swart, that one day the Bahamas will be the greatest Black-led nation in the world. That's my dream, that we will change the narrative on Black leadership. We won't be corrupt and third world. I don't even like that. Dr. Sanders tells me that there's no such thing as who named us, right? Like who gave us that definition? And so I think that to get there must be a national change. And only way things happen nationally is if we change individually, right? Like a collective decision to find meaning. And so that's why I think that, we have to have these discussions that we can then as a people realize, hold on, the status quo ain't working. This water, I'm in the water, but something ain't right with this whole picture, right? Like we have to question these things and break the status quo because who does it benefit? Who does it benefit, right? So I asked a question right before the break. How does change come? How does this reauthoring happen? Does it have to start at the top of the hierarchy or can it start at the bottom? And I don't like hierarchies anyway, but how does it work?
So it begins firstly with people that understand that pen is in my hands. The pen is in our community's hands. In the writing of an alternative story. I once asked somebody around, shouldn't we step on the larger stage of the world and announce we are busy with an alternative story? And somebody said, he thinks that it needs to be subversive. It needs to grow from the bottom up. And it needs to be firmly established in the understanding of what we're busy with, and then by the time it arises, there is no defending against it.
Yes, I like that.
So I think if communities of Bahamians come together and are custodians of the alternative, are custodians of the stories we want more of. Notice them, retell them, share them like you do on this platform, then it becomes a larger, unstoppable story that you are busy telling, living also, and retelling, and creating the conditions for them to thrive and to not be put down. I think that's the biggest thing with stories. In the tender beginning of stories, when we start living alternative stories, like what is happening right now with the emerging alternative around tourism, how can we nourish those stories? How can we come alongside those individuals that dare to try something else? How can we not put one another down? And how can we ask and say, how can I come alongside this plan of yours, or this practice of yours, or these initiatives of yours? How can I retell your stories? I strongly believe that there's this practice in the Irish tradition where they call the one who holds the stories of the village the Shanaki. And if they wanted to kill the village, they would kill the Shanaki, because the Shanaki held the history and the stories of the village. And in a certain sense, I think the invitation for us is to be the story keepers, to hold the stories of an alternative future for our people, our nations, and our communities. And that means we notice it when we see it. We bring close and we say, how can I retell the story? Can I retell the story? What is the networks that you need for the story to live fully into this world? And how can communally we come alongside those small initiatives that others might say, that's nothing special, you won't change the world with that. I love those, because they will change the world if we come alongside them.
Yes, I love that. And I love that you said to come alongside, right? Like, and the fact that, oh man, I love it that you say we start from the bottom and then we come alongside, right? We facilitate the change. We help to carry this change through and not be hindrances to the change. And so I gather what that also means is that we listen. We have to be great listeners as leaders.
Yeah. And no black crab syndrome, hey?
No, none of that, right? None of that.
Not allowed.
And that comes from that scarcity, right? I think you and I, or was it Dr. Sanders who said, yeah, because the three of us were chatting briefly.
That's right.
And one of the things you mentioned was that when it only happens in the pen, when they're caged, but when they're out, they're actually very much a free bunch and a helpful bunch. And I think that we have this cage, this scarcity mindset. That's why I love Dr. Sanders and her work, her book. By the way, I'm giving away a lot of her books. So I want more folks to read it. And now I have to get some of yours now, Ms. Schwartz, so I can make sure give them away as well. We got to, I'm giving away books now, man. We're going to read ourselves into freedom. But I love the fact that we're talking bottom up as well, that it must be that groundswell, that understanding of the need to reauthor. What steps would you give, right? Basic steps. And we did this earlier, but I want us, as we're coming closer to the end, really to drill down on the power of reauthoring, why we need to do it, and then how do we do it? And I'll turn it to you.
So for me, the power, and that's why I dare to give a title like Reauthoring the World. So firstly, we are all meaning makers. That means things happen in our life, both individually and collectively, and we make meaning. And then we weave those different meanings together and we make stories. So firstly, see yourself as a story maker, a meaning maker in this world, which means that you're an active participant in the way things end. By every story that you are participating in. Then find a community that that would dare to dream about this alternative, that would dare to live an alternative story with one another and for the different communities and nations that you are part of. Find a community. This is not a I did it my way, soul endeavor, alone hero stuff. This is a communal act. We are all co-authoring the world. So find yourself some co-authors that say, this is what is happening. And with this community, ask yourself, what do they say? And what do they say? This is just the way things are. And unpack it, bring stories with one another and say, I heard they said that. Yes. And then say, okay, so where does that story come from? Who benefits? Are there emerging alternatives? And then the third step, always have your eyes on the horizon for stories that are different, stories that are not problem saturated, that don't weigh you down, but that give you that glimpse of hope and say, oh, but that sounds different. How is that possible? How can I come alongside that? I'll never forget, I was in Olivia's car one day, and we were supposed to, we were driving in this way, and people wanted to get into the road. And she stopped. There wasn't a stop sign. And she stopped and she let this person in. And I'm like, how does that happen? She said, you never know. It's my neighbor or my family. And I'm like, imagine if we are all connected and we are all one collective, and that my actions and the stories I retell is for the common good and the journey to the common good. And in that process, we are reauthoring the way things are. If we dare to be story makers that are writing an alternative story, not alone, not as alone heroes, but as different communities.
Yes. This is, if you're just tuning in, Shanae Swart, author of Reauthoring the World. Sorry, I'm on reauthorizing. Don't type in Reauthorizing the World in Amazon. Type in Reauthoring the World. Shanae spelled Chene, Swart, Swart. And, I don't know if Amazon minds that there's an accent over the E, and I know most of us don't know how to put the accent over the E because I tried.
Yeah.
How do you put it?
Don't worry. Yeah, don't worry about the accent. We don't have French keyboards.
And I want you guys at her website too, please. It's just a lot of wonderful articles there. Transformations with an S, transformations with an S, .co/.ca, sorry, .co.za, and wonderful website filled with great content, articles that give you a great insight into this reauthoring business and why it's so important. So Ms. Swart, now and I love that you gave steps and why it's so important. Why is it powerful? Why do we need to reauthor? In one of your articles, you mentioned a lot the moment. You mentioned moments a lot. Moments. And when you were mentioning it, and there was one question about what moment, what was the moment? I try to remember. All I remember me thinking was, yeah, that was the moment I felt the freest, right? And because there was a question you asked, and I went back in my mind, and it was the weirdest thing. I was off to school eating a slice of pizza at about 10 p.m. at night in front of this pizzeria, just outside talking to one of my friends. And I remember in that moment, never being more free, like happy and free, no care in the world. And I don't know. And I remember the conversation she and I were having. And I thought to myself, why did I remember that moment? What is so important about that moment? And you asked, you talk a lot about moments and why are moments important? How does that work into your reauthoring therapy, your narrative therapy?
So if we are story makers, we are in relationship with a multiplicity of stories, like the stars in the heaven. But because as cultures, a lot of the Western cultures in particular, have lost the art of storytelling. So I remember right in the beginning, I would work with leaders and I would say, tell me a story about your leadership. And they would totally freak out. I don't have a story, or I can't tell it that good. And then I had a wonderful friend, Jeff Zimmerman, who said, well, ask the question maybe about a heartfelt moment, the moment as the smallest unit of experience. Because we can string a bunch of moments together and have a very fat, voluptuous story.
Yes.
But it starts with moments. And it's important that, and then the question morphed again and saying, well, take me to that moment. Because if I take you there, you are transported with me. You become a witness to me in that moment. And that moment is full of sensory experience. What we see and hear and feel and taste, and the time of the day, the expressions on everybody's face. And in that moment, it has a lot of clues about what matters to us. Like you said, freedom matters. And now you can ask yourself a bunch of questions around freedom. Why does freedom matter to you so much? And so if you ask about moments, so a person says, this country, the Bahamian country, matters to me deeply. I wish, like you said, I wish that one day we would be an example of Black leadership in this world. Then I can ask you, take me to a moment when Black leadership and this country became important to you. And you might not think now, maybe it comes, maybe it doesn't, but boy, oh boy, will they put up their hands, because our lives are littered with moments. If we just give them a chance, sometimes people drive and then they remember the moment, or they walk along the beach and then they remember the moment. And there are always more moments. And that's the thing. There's a whole history of moments that have brought you to this place where you have expressed your wildest dream for the future. What and if your country and leadership.
I thank you, and I'm thinking to myself, I need to figure out when did that happen. But what about folks who have bad moments? Like, to someone, let's say someone who has been, who was, sexually violated, and that moment has shaped their lives, right? How does the reauthoring work when there's trauma?
Yes. And so this is a very important distinction. That in narrative therapy, we don't believe that people have to go back to the trauma to be healed, because it can be re-traumatizing. To return as an adult to an event that happened maybe as a child. So what in the work of Michael White that I've read around sexual abuse is that he would always say that we have to work with identity first, and then people that have been survivors of these experiences can choose again if the return to this moment is important for them or not. Because we have a medical model saying only it's like a wound and you have to go back and you have to put in the antibiotics, and our lives we are not wounds. We are in relationships to different moments. And when it comes to those traumatic moments, it's super important that people have the ground under their feet. They have rich conclusions about their identities and about who they are in the world, for them to then decide what kind of relationship I want to have with these kinds of moments. So it is not in trauma, not a return to those moments in a medical model, a sense of return. Is that an answer?
No, that's a great answer, and it's different, and I like it because that's true. So a lot of people don't want to go back to that trauma. It can be re-traumatizing. I mean, we do a lot of shows on mental health, and like I've mentioned many times, right? And I do a segment with one of our country's, leading psychologists, and we touch on some of these topics all the time. And I love that this is an option as well, where we're like, okay, you don't have to go back. We focus on identity. Who are you, right? Like,
and again, sometimes these kind of people have been isolated. So identity is a very tricky thing, having been told you're bad, and if not, and you should have, and all of those things. And therefore, we always call on the community who loves you dearly, who would not be surprised that you have this other life
yes.
beyond your relationship to your survival in this sense. And then we draw on when people cannot remember these moments that they would want more of. Not the traumatic event, but maybe moments that would say something about who they are. Sometimes people come through these traumatic events, they can't even remember if they like pasta or not,
Yes, yeah.
And then we always call on the community who have seen you, who have loved you, who have had wild dreams for your life. And we almost call them into the remembering. That's also a word that we've got from Barbara Meyerhoff. It's remembering.
Yeah, I saw that.
So we put the membership of people that love us dearly back into our lives. We also, when we put their membership back, we also put the memories back. Memories that talk of a different identities than what problem stories wanted us to believe all along.
Shanae Swart, ladies and gentlemen, I am so honored that you took the time to join us today. There's so much meat on these bones. I gather my audience will be tuning in and watching this again and again and listening to it again on the show, on the radio. So it's a pleasure to have you reauthoring the world, Shanae Swart. And it's a wonderful body of work she continues to do. Don't forget to visit her website. Thank you so much, Ms. Swart. I appreciate the time. And you can come into the halls of our parliament any time. I have no access, but if I did, I would definitely.
I'll only go with you, darling.
Thank you so much, and be safe and take care of yourself and watch that garden, eh?
Thank you. Thank you so much for the gift of all your beautiful questions.
Thank you for so many wonderful answers, man. You're the best. Thank you so much. You're listening to the Hit Back with Nahaja Black, Shanae Swart, y'all. Please go ahead, buy the book. Go to our website. The website name, again, it's transformations with an s.co.za. I want you guys to go there. There's so much wonderful content there, articles to continue reauthoring. If you are a leader of a party, I would advise you, please, let's go again. We have to reshape. We have to change the narrative. The status quo is not working. We are not satisfied. The masses of Bahamian people are tired of going between parties, the same, either or. It's a bad relationship. We are finding ourselves being the bruised and battered person in the relationship, going between lovers that are not working out for us. And this is not healthy. Are we happy? Are we a happy nation? Are we a whole nation? Do we feel a society as a whole is growing in the right direction? We need to start asking, if not, why not? Removing ourselves from the it is what it is mantra. Because what it is not working, ladies and gentlemen. What it is cannot be for much longer. And the fact that this is a statement that is being shared by leadership is a direct indication of how far we are from where we should want to be. You're listening to the Hit Back with Nahaja Black, Guardian Radio 96.9 FM. I hope that everybody enjoys the show, because I sure did. And again, special thanks all the way from South Africa, y'all. The show growing, y'all. We went to South Africa, baby. Woo! All right, let me calm down. Everyone have a great day. You're listening to the Hit Back with Nahaja Black, Guardian Radio 96.9 FM.